you know, a story about that, a story about cheating, some connotation.
Hello. Today I'm here with Anthony Brandon Wong. Anthony is an award-winning actor. He's worked on many international, very big budget films as well as things here in Australia. You might know him as Ghost from The Matrix or Danny Law from The Family Law. Anthony's also worked in theatre for many years, and I've also now discovered through the research that I've been doing for today's interview that Anthony was also a journalist, he's a stand-up comic, and he's a cabaret singer. So, wow, so many things to talk about. Thank you, Anthony, for giving me some time.
Oh, this is a delight to come to your place and just hang out with your beautiful dogs here who are making little pitter-patters around our feet, and also because you've been in my class. So
absolutely. Oh yes, I didn't talk about you being a fantastic teacher and so gifted.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
so gifted.
No, it's just an indulgence to sit for an hour or so and just take a trip down memory lane through the career. So.
Fantastic. Well, let's start with where you started.
Well, I got into acting after journalism, because when I started in 1985, there weren't any, well, not that I was aware of any full-time Asian Australian actors in the biz. You know, people would do acting roles who were Asian, who might have been doctors in the day, and they get called to do a cameo or an extra role. But there wasn't anyone who'd like gone through NIDA. That I think there were. No, I should correct that. There was Monroe Reimers, who was a Sri Lankan actor. He had gone through NIDA. But in terms of Southeast Asian, you know, actors from China or who looked like me, I can't remember anybody that was full-time. So I went into journalism, which I loved, but it was a kind of second choice, because really, deep down was the acting. I wanted to do the acting. And then there came a certain point I went, look, I'm just going to go for it and see what happens. And maybe nothing will happen, or maybe things will open up, and things opened up.
That's fantastic. Roughly how old were you then?
A wee boy of 19, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So you got into your journalism quite young then?
I did actually, and because I know your dad was a journalist, and I think it was maybe, I don't know if it was easier then, or I don't know. I mean, I know now it's supremely competitive to get a cadetship or even to get into one of the journalism schools, and it was back then too. But I just started doing work experience. I did work experience with Today FM. I've got a great story about that. I was doing work experience and I was typing out a story, and it was very close to the 3 o'clock bulletin.
Yep.
And it was like 1 minute to 3. And I said, blah, 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 has been accused of murder. And we rushed it off to Warren Burr, who was reading out the news. And he almost said accused, because the person I was writing about wasn't accused, wasn't convicted. No, sorry, I said convicted. And
he was accused?
He was accused, and I said convicted. So Warren almost said, blah, 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 has been accused. And then Warren came out of the news studio, the recording studio, and just blew me a new, you know, whatsy, which he should have. But I was young, I didn't know what I was doing. So that's my one of my stories of journalism. But I did get to write a column for the Sydney Morning Herald. I got to write for Tennis Magazine and for the Sun Herald. So it didn't end my journalism days, that near debacle. But that was a second choice.
So where did the desire to be an actor come from then?
Well, I was a bit of a show-off, like, from a young age. And at age 12, we had these Christmas concerts with our extended family, because I've got about 50 cousins. So I would be the director and the writer and one of the stars of these terrible Christmas concerts where you know that show Perfect Match with Greg Evans? We used to, on the Christmas show, we would have our version of Chinese Perfect Match, but the horrible thing was the aunties and uncles were the contestants, so we're literally creating incest on a show when I was age 12. God. And we would do like numbers, I don't know, we would do some terrible, you know, dance numbers and singing numbers. But that was my first days in doing theatre, street theatre.
So where did you train? You said that you didn't go into NIDA or one of those. So where did you start to train? Because I know that ongoing training is something that you're really passionate about.
I worked it out the other day. I think I've had more than 100 teachers in acting, voice, movement, Alexander Technique, mask, clown. I just love it. I love it. So I started, my very first class was at Macquarie Uni, where I was doing political science, I was doing an arts degree there. With a wonderful teacher called, I think, Josephine Lee. It was so fun. And then from there I went to the One Extra company run by a Malaysian Chinese director and choreographer called Katai Chan. And I did voice there, and I did Japanese no theatre, and I did improv and mask making. And then from there I went on to a place that's no longer around called the Academy of Dramatic and Social Arts. Very long title, in Haymarket. And while I was at it was called ADASA, is the acronym, at ADASA, 5 months into the course, we had a student production, and an agent, Richard Kent, came to see us in that show, and there was an audition going at STC, Sydney Theatre Company, for The Floating World with Ron Hadrick and Gary McDonald and Melissa Jaffa. And I auditioned. Richard Werrett was one of the directors, and Wayne Harrison, and I got the role.
Wow.
And so ADASA allowed me to take time out to do the play and then to come back. And then from there on, you know, as I know about you, because you love learning as much as I do, you know, it's been a love affair with acting, and just constant wanting to find another access point for our art form. So loads. I'm doing a class this week with the Groundlings from LA, and last week I worked with beautiful Scott Williams, who teaches Meisner, and then not long ago we both did the Steppenwolf workshop at 16th Street. So it's just joyful to study.
Yes, it is, and I love it too. And I know that, I mean, you just said that you've done so many different techniques. Can you talk about why you think that learning all of those different techniques is worthwhile and important?
Yeah, I think it's because being an acting coach and teacher, I want the maximum number of ways to meet an actor where they're at. And I have actors who come from every different tradition. Like, I have students who have trained at the Gaulier School in Paris, and I did some work with Philippe Gaulier, and then I have other people who train with Ivana Chubbuck, which I trained with Ivana over a period of 12 years in LA and also Australia. And then other people come from NIDA or VCA, and these are, for those of you watching overseas, these are, you know, top acting schools in Australia. So I want the ability to not impose, this is the way you should work, but to see where that particular beautiful special soul is coming from in terms of the way they like to work. And some people like to work with imagination, other people like to draw from their real life and do sense memory, other people want to work on actions, other people want to access acting through the body, through Laban, through character work, physical character work. And I love being able to meet them at all those points and go, yeah, okay, why don't we do this? I just think, even though you intellectually might know about acting, it's not the same as doing it. Like, you can intellectually know how to do a bicep curl, but you've got to be able to, so going to class means you go to the dojo and you put into practice and you take risks and you try a different way. And so I'm going to be doing that till I'm, you know, old and dottery. I'll still be going to a class at 16th Street if it's still around by then.
So for yourself, I imagine that depending on the role, you are picking from a whole range of different techniques.
Totally. Because, you know, one of the core ways I work is the Ivana Chubbuck technique, which you've done with me. And that draws a lot from your real life, and that's fabulous. And as you know, it's very effective in many ways. But there's sometimes I don't want to go to my real life. I want to experience being in Russia if I'm doing Three Sisters. I want to feel like, what is it like to be a Russian? I want to go into my imagination. So then I'll use those techniques. It really depends on the role. And sometimes it depends on the quality of the script. If the script is really evocative and emotionally triggering, just by reading it, you burst into tears, then who needs substitution? You might just, or you could put substitution in there and see if it makes it better. So it makes your work more rich and deeper. So it depends on the role. I'll give you an example. When I worked with Gary Oldman and Christian Slater on this zany film, comedy called Guns, Girls and Gambling, my character, Asian Elvis, had to really dislike the characters played by Gary and Christian. So, and they're just such lovely men in real life. So I used a substitution of someone I didn't like, and I endowed Gary and Christian with that person because I needed that. But when I was working on Hemingway and Gellhorn, this HBO miniseries, Nicole Kidman and Clive Owen were the people I was working with, and my character, Joanne Lai, was enamoured of them. He looked up to their characters, Hemingway and Gellhorn. So I just used them. I didn't use any extra stuff. So yeah, it depends on what it is, really.
You've just mentioned some of the many people that you've worked with in your Hollywood career and in Australia. Is there any through line that you've been able to see? Do they all work in a similar way? Is there anything that you've been able to see that all of those people use in their professional life?
Are you talking in terms of a particular acting approach that is consistent across all those different people?
Well, I'm interested to know whether there's anything that you've noticed that they all have in common.
Oh, that's a great question. Well, firstly, the acting techniques vary. They're all coming from different places, but I think the thing that I notice is they resonate from a place of loving their life. And I don't mean all the time. They're human. They have ups and downs like anyone else, but they've got a level of energy around appreciation of their life, which makes them charismatic. If you're the kind of person that's always walking around being negative about everything and, you know, woe is me, it's not a very attractive quality to hang out with for 14 hours a day on a set. But I remember, for example, Christian Slater, and in between takes of what we were doing on Guns, Girls and Gambling, he would turn to me between takes and go, like a little Cheshire Cat kid, loving the process, you know? That was just one example of many of who wouldn't want to work. He's talented, but he's a lovely man. He's a lovely human being. I remember working with Lawrence Fishburne, and I was on the set of The Matrix in America, and one of the first things Lawrence did was to come over and can I just take your hand?
Yeah.
And he looked me straight in the eyes and he said, "Hi, I'm Lawrence. Great to meet you," with absolute genuine love and open-heartedness. Now, who's not going to want to work with someone like that? So I really think the level of consciousness is equally important as the craft in an actor. No point having this wonderful craft, but being difficult and critical and neurotic and not a team player and unable to take direction and arrogant. You know, and I think what they have in common, which is such a beautiful question, is that.
Isn't that interesting? That's great.
More often than not, they're not dippy downers, as I would call them. They're people who, they're really grateful, grateful to be doing what they're doing.
What took you to Hollywood? How did you get there?
Oh gosh, I'd wanted to go to LA for a lot of years, and back in 1995 I did an Australian independent film called Floating Life, where I was the male lead in that, and I was thinking I'll go on the back of that, and my very wise agent Robin Gardner said, you know, that film hasn't really made a huge impact in America. Like, it went to some film festivals, but it's not something that the Americans know. You should probably wait for something that's more meaningful to the Americans and more known. And I did wait, and I waited another 11 years after that till Matrix came out. I'm so glad I waited, because if I'd gone earlier, I don't think I would have been ripe to really, I might have been more intimidated. Because I was even intimidated a little bit going there when I'd done Matrix, and I was 36 by that stage or something. So I was older, a bit wiser, I'd done more work, and I was more able to, I suppose, be more confident in what I was doing, even though it was still, you know, there's so many actors in LA. It can be really daunting. So I went on the back of The Matrix, and because of those, you know, it was Matrix Reloaded, Matrix Revolutions, and I was the lead with Jada Pinkett Smith in The Game. So that opened a lot of doors, and I was able to get in to see lots of big agents there, and I was able to go see a lot of top casting people, which is fantastic.
Yeah, that is such a gift.
It's such a gift, you know, because otherwise you could be like, who are you? Knocking on doors, and not like I wasn't still knocking on doors, but that was a great entree into LA.
I'm fascinated about The Game. What's it like working on a game?
Well, you do this thing called facial capture. You've got all these like motion capturing balls. You look like you've got the worst acne, multicolored acne, and the balls on your face capture every nuance of your face. So they literally record your movement, like Leslie's movement, Anthony's movement, but then they can refashion it in a computer to make a carrot move like Leslie, like a character of carrot with eyes. And you see, and they did that for me. They demonstrated the makers of the game put my movement onto something like a vegetable, and this vegetable was walking the way I walk. I was like, how's that possible? So we did 15 months of facial capture, capturing all your facial expressions, like a catalogue of different movements of your face and also your body movements. And so that was a very big part of it. So it was like theatre. And so Jada Pinkett Smith and I and the other actors were in this, what they call a volume, which is a blank space with all these cameras around. And you're just doing all these scenes with nothing there. No, like there's the bare minimum props. You might be on the top of a building about to be shot by Hugo Weaving as the agent. So you have to act that. And then you might be running down a freeway, to go meet Keanu to help him in his cause. So you have no it's theatre. Complete imagination.
Wow.
So that was so fun. And because the game was written and directed by the Wachowski brothers, who are now the Wachowskis, who made this amazing transition to women. Do you know that? They're both, Larry and Andy are now women, and they're just such inspiring, incredible role models for the LGBTQI community.
Yeah.
And but at that time they were men, and they directed the game as well. So I got the opportunity to almost like be the lead in my own mini Matrix movie, because there was a lot of footage that we shot with the Wachowskis, and it was a blast. Oh my God, it was a blast. What a way to go into Hollywood.
Yeah, absolutely. Anthony, you've worked in the big blockbusters all the way down to quite intimate and small things here. Can you contrast what it's like being on the set of the big ones?
I'm laughing because when you say small intimate things, I'm getting a memory of a time I was on a bus playing, and the bus represented like one of the old colonial ships coming from England to Australia, but we were on a bus. And another time in that same production, I was in my underwear being hosed down at the performance space in Redfern in Sydney. And my mother came to the show. I was naked except for these tight white undies being hosed down, and the hosing down was representing the ocean waves, like hitting all the coolies from the past. And my mother said, "Anthony, you got your underwear on. Aren't you going to catch a cold in front of the whole audience?" So there's glamour for you. It's just like Hollywood actor in his underwear being hosed down. So yeah, it's been such a blessing to do really intimate, fringe, co-op, unpaid work through to these big $300 movies, Yeah. And there's something amazing about every stage of that.
Yeah.
There really is.
So what is it like being on the big blockbuster sets?
Oh God, well, when I first walked onto the set of The Matrix, which wasn't the set, it was the gym. That was the first place I walked in. I was so intimidated, and I was 36, but I was like a kid in a candy store. And then there's Keanu Reeves over there at the bench press. There's Carrie-Anne Moss doing her Pilates. And I walked in, my eyes must have been as big as saucers. And I was like, oh my God, who am I? I'm with these big stars. And Hugo Weaving, God bless him, walked over, and he must have seen my deer in the headlights look. And he came over and he said, "Anthony," and I'd met him before. He was so lovely. He basically said, I know it could be a bit intimidating walking onto this big set, and if there's anything I can do for you, like if I can talk you through the script so you're more familiar with what's going on, or, like him and Lawrence Fishburne coming over and greeting me like that. What a beautiful introduction to that big, bright lights world. Yeah. So, and those people became great friends, and we would socialise a lot over 15 months. But it was a beautiful introduction to just meet people who were real and generous. And that's what they were. There wasn't ego on that show, on that set. The people were very real and accessible. And September 11 happened in the middle of shooting Matrix 2 and 3, and that brought us as a cast and crew. And I remember we had to shoot a war scene in one of the Matrix movies, and September 11 had just happened. And so this Lawrence Fishburne took a moment. It had just happened like 4 days before, and we're on the set in Sydney, and he said, "I want," in that Morpheus voice, "I would like everybody to hold hands." So we're holding hands, the entire crew and cast of that set. Christine Arnoux to my left, we're all holding hands, and he just said, "We have to look after each other, and we have to care for each other." And it was so touching, given what had just happened in the world. And he said, we're going to be a team, and we're going to do the best we can with these movies, and it was just like, that was the kind of atmosphere. Humane, and Jada Pinkett's kids, Jada Pinkett and Will Smith's Jaden, who's now a big star, he was a little boy. So we had a lot of kids on the set too, and we had Jada's baby Olive, and that humanised the set as well. So it was unforgettable time of my life.
Absolutely.
So grateful.
Yeah. I want to ask you about working with Ruth Cracknell, the late great Ruth Cracknell.
Well, I was a transvestite on a bus, as you are, which I love those characters. I've played lots of transgender characters, and she was this Shakespeare quoting eccentric woman in Lillian's story, and so we had a kind of improvised scene that wasn't scripted, and basically the scene was that she had to come over and start quoting Shakespeare, and her line was, "My gay apparel," was her line. But I chose to take it personally, like she was being homophobic or transgender phobic. And I was like, "I can't believe you said that." And I had to rush off to the bus driver and get her thrown off. So she was such a good sport. And I just remember, what are the words that come to mind? Just lovely and grounded and no airs and graces, like just a real person. And I just was pinching myself that I was working with this icon of the Australian theatre and industry, you know, and so blessed, you know. Even there was just the one scene, but I'll never forget that.
Absolutely.
It was so delicious.
Yeah, yeah. Anthony, you're also doing stand-up comedy.
Well, I have done some stand-up comedy. I don't do it anymore, although doing the Groundlings right now at this course at 16th Street, the Groundlings is this amazing school from LA in comedy improv. Who knows? But I did do some stand-up comedy with Wagorama. And that was with Nick Giannopoulos and Mary Kustis. And Mary Kustis as Effie taught me the Greek accent. And I've got a story that I was here in Melbourne I was in rehearsals for Wagorama, and I was playing a Greek guy called Konzigopoulos. And I went into this restaurant, and there was no one in the restaurant, and they put me at the worst seat in near the toilet, basically. And I was like, are they racist? What's going on here? They could have put me at any seat. But then I said, I basically did my Greek accent for them. And I said, I'm working on the Shaka Wagorama with, Mary Kustis, and they put me the best seat. They were so, like, I was now an icon to them. And I was like, look what a Greek accent can get you, you know? They might have even sent out free food, I don't know. So that was kind of what I was doing in terms of stand-up in that show, and then I did some stand-up outside of that. But I've been doing TV comedy, like The Family Law, which is like a dramedy. It's like a comedy, but it's got a strong dramatic feeling to it as well. So that's 3 seasons of that, and I love that show.
It's a great show.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. And before that, Maximum Choppage, doing that very silly, wonderfully over-the-top kung fu comedy, you know, so...
I was listening to Richard Roxburgh on the radio the other day, and he was talking about corpsing and how he corpsed so badly on something that he was doing that they had to take an early lunch. He just could not get himself together.
Oh, I love hearing that about Richard. That's great.
Yeah. So can you talk about what's corpsing, and has it happened to you?
Yes, of course it has. It's probably happening now. Corpsing, I don't even know where that term comes from, but it's where you just can't stop laughing. And usually happens when you're doing some drama where you've got to be serious. It's happened to me on an ABC radio play that beautiful Alana Valentine wrote. And Alana was in the recording studio, and I was with Jessica Napier, and both of our stomachs were rumbling, like it was like an internal flatulence. And it was quite serious, the scenario, you know, because Alana writes these beautiful, she writes many things, but this is a beautiful piece. And it was very heartfelt, and we'd get to a point in the dialogue where it's like something like, you know, I'm so sad about your mother's passing. I don't know, I'm making that up. And then our stomach would go, and then we'd piss ourselves laughing, and that's corpsing. And we couldn't stop. We just got progressively worse. And Alana was like, what are you doing to my play? I mean, I want to apologise to Alana Valentine, who, so sorry that I ruined your play with my internal flatulence. So it happens, and it usually happens when something's extra serious, like there's some death scene or... And it's the worst. At the time, it's the worst. Afterwards, it's hilarious when you think about it. Yeah. So I have had that happen. But speaking of Richard, I murdered him with piano wire in this. I'm in Luna Park in Sydney because I was playing this villain and I slit his throat with piano wire and had to drag him off. And all I could keep thinking while I was doing that scene was, God, you're good looking. I'm dragging his body off going, you're so, you know, it was back in 1989 and I was like, God, you're handsome. You're such a handsome actor. So maybe my mind wasn't on the job that day. So.
Well, everybody can have bad acting days.
Yes. Oh, speaking of bad acting days, I remember beautiful Kate Blanchett saying that to me exactly, saying to me on Little Fish, she said, I'm so sorry I'm having a bad acting day. And I was just like, can I have one of your bad acting days? And I felt that was so humble because, you know, she's like God, acting goddess. And just so real. She didn't have to say that, and I just was so touched that she said that. Like, oh, thank you, because I was just seeing you on a pedestal for the last 4 hours. You know, you know. Yeah. It's so. What I love about our craft is you never stop being humbled by it. It doesn't matter what awards you've won or who you've worked with. You know, you walk out there again. It could be terrifying all over again because it's something you haven't done before, or in the case of sometimes older actors, you know, I worked with someone recently and she's a very accomplished actress and she was having this great fear that she could no longer remember lines easily. And, you know, and this is someone who's done so much in the industry and that really touches me that it doesn't matter who you are.
Yes, every performance is starting again, isn't it?
Yeah, and every new role, and maybe you haven't done that genre before. Like, imagine being an actor who's always done sort of small, subtle naturalism, you know, and then you get a farce and you're like, oh my God, I'm going to be so over the top. Or you get cast in a musical theatre show with accomplished musical theatre performers and you're like, how am I going to... Well, that's how I felt doing Wagorama, because I was with a bunch of comedians. Yes. And then I was like, I'm not funny. And I had to learn to be funny during that show, and that was such a amazing apprenticeship.
So how did you do that?
I don't know, I approached it through acting. I just thought, okay, let's try to find the truth of these characters and work on their accents. And I learned a lot from watching Mary and Nick and then just the doing, and the scripts were really funny. Just the doing of it, like I learnt timing and, you know, I learnt when not to come in with a line, to wait for the laugh, and just those sort of basics that you learn through doing.
Anthony, you've spent a lot of time with the Chubbuck Technique. Can you tell us a bit about what that is?
Yes, it's a technique created by Ivana Chubbuck, who is a very world-renowned acting coach, and she's worked with a lot of great people like Jake Gyllenhaal and Brad Pitt and Halle Berry and Charlize Theron. And she developed a technique that draws from the power of your life. So substitution, which is endowing the other actor with someone from your life, is a very important part of that technique. So if you and I were doing a scene and the character was wanting forgiveness, I might project onto you a person from my life that I've unwittingly or wittingly, you know, hurt in my younger silly days, and I could look at you and I could see that person that there goes my internal flatulence again. Sorry about that, everyone watching. Was that you or me?
It was you.
What did you put in that tea? This is corpsing in action. So I might, oh God, from Chubbuck to flatulence. Many techniques. So I would look at you and I would maybe endow you with a person that I, you know, have had a breakup with or said some things in the past that I wasn't proud of. And in doing that, it instantly starts to generate a feeling of guilt and it makes me want to get your forgiveness. You know, so that's only one of many things in the Chubbuck technique, but it's called the power of the actor for a reason, and it's because it uses all the, and sometimes painful things that have happened in an actor's life, but not for indulgence, but to power the need to win an objective in a positive way, to turn pain into something hopeful. You know, you look at something like Charlize Theron, who's trained by Ivana Chubbuck, and in that incredible performance in Monster that she won the Oscar for, she is she's a serial killer. Now, who's going to like a serial killer watching that? But the way that Charlize did it, to take her own personal pain that she'd been through in her life and to use that to play this character who just wanted love, who just wanted redemption, who just wanted to have a house on the hill with her girlfriend, played by Christina Ricci. She turned something very negative into something that we felt for her. We thought, she just wants a good life. She doesn't want to kill people, but coming from where she's come from, she doesn't know any other way to get her power back. So Ivana is trying to take the pains and traumas of someone's life and turn them into a win.
One of the things that concerns me about techniques like that is the need to look after yourself.
Oh, it's such a good question, and I agree with you. Self-care, we were talking about that in the car earlier today on the way to the interview. Yes, absolutely. I mean, and every actor has to intuitively find and experiment with their own way to do that. See, for me, I did Three Sisters last year at Sydney Theatre Company, and I was playing Chubbuck, and I had to sob twice a night and had to go into a really dark place because he's a depressive alcoholic. And I would watch Kath and Kim, this, for those of you who don't know overseas, this iconic Australian comedy show. That was my de-rolling. I'd come home and put Kath and Kim on to let go of anything serious or negative or painful. That was one of the ways I de-rolled. Other people might meditate. I'm a great advocate of therapy. You know, if you're doing a really difficult role, tapping into really fragile and tender territory, you might want the support of a very reliable and trustworthy and accomplished and skilled therapist to help you move through whatever feelings are triggered by the role.
One of the things Kim Farron talks about,
wonderful Kim,
wonderful director, she talks about working with your inner child.
I like that.
Yeah, and supporting yourself through working with your inner child and comforting the inner child.
I totally agree with that, and I think if that's a modality or a way of looking at it that works for you, which works for me, great, do that. Do you know what? One of the great philosophies I have around self-care in its relationship to acting is that I believe we all, you and I and Rod filming this and everyone, you know, everyone watching this, has a version of themselves that is completely intact at all times. What I mean by intact, it is always sane, it is always peaceful, it is always loving, it is not bruised or damaged by any external phenomena. So someone could have had an abusive father or mother, and this spiritual part of us didn't get bruised by any of that. Now, a personality might have, but there's a deeper part than the personality. And so in your wonderful question about self-care, one of the ways I take self-care in doing the acting work that I do and also teach it to students is to remind them, even if you are going to a really, really dark place emotionally, underneath that is a part of you sitting there like Buddha going, it's fine. So part of you might be freaking out and neurotic and worried about your performance and afraid to go to the rage or whatever. And underneath that is a part that is not threatened or afraid of any of that stuff. And I feel asking what those A-list actors have in common is that I feel that successful, happy people live more often in alignment with that version of themselves than with their conditioned neurosis or not good enough thoughts or judgmental thoughts. And so as an actor, what I think is a great model is to take a day trip to Medea or the pain of a particular role and then come back to your fabulous life by thinking with that true self in you that is always calm, sane, loving of self, loving of others, unifying with other people, compassionate. And that's nothing new. I'm talking about many spiritual traditions have talked about that. But I really think it's a great model for acting.
It is. It's wonderful. Thank you very much for sharing that. It's great.
Welcome.
Yeah. Anthony, how did teaching come into your life?
Oh, I've always loved to teach. And how did it come in? Someone offered me a role. I think it might have been, was it Sandra Lee Patterson who runs on-camera connections, a TV and film acting studio in Sydney, and at the time it was called V for Video, and this is back in the 90s, and I think I started to teach that, and I just felt an affinity for it. I love people, and so it's a natural fit for me to want to be, in any way I can, part of their journey to help them empower themselves as a human being, as an artist. And so I love it as much as acting. I truly do. I know some people might be teaching because it's a job, as a backup job, and that's fine, that's valid. But for me, it's not that. It's equally a vocation and a calling as being in front of the camera or on stage. Some of my happiest times in life are being in a class and watching a scene come to life.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just truly glorious.
And you are a gifted teacher. You certainly,
thank you.
You certainly bring so much out in such a safe environment, and that takes us back to what we've just been talking about. You create a wonderful, safe environment.
I think that's essential, the safety.
Yeah, and allow people to fly, which is just wonderful to be part of.
It's just delicious to watch people's progress.
There are many different acting techniques, and we've talked about Chubbuck, which is one that you've spent a lot of time working with. But a lot of people have different techniques, and there are a number of people in the community, the acting community, that really prefer one over another and have concerns about using different ones. Yeah. What's your thought about that?
Great question. I think that we've been positional, and what I mean by positional is that as human beings, for so much of history, we've taken a position. This is my position, that's your position, Leslie. And it's been a very either or kind of mentality, but we've seen what that's done through history. And I feel that there's no need to make anyone else's technique wrong. You may not get a lot of value out of that technique, but it doesn't mean that other people don't.
Absolutely.
And so we're all different. Yes. And even within a lifetime of an actor, you could change. You could say that in the early part I used Meisner, which I did, and which I still do, and then you might move to using practical aesthetics, or you might go to Laban, or you might work out your own process. So I just think there's a lot to learn from each other. And there's no need to, I mean, even with Chubbuck, I know that people who have never done it, never read a book about it, never even been to a class, and write it off. They go, oh, I heard about that technique, I think it's wrong. And I go, how do you know it's wrong? And they go, well, I've just heard through someone who knew someone who... And you think, where are you getting that basis to be so judgmental? So, at least do it and then make up your own mind. And even if you did do 6 months of it and it didn't work for you, that doesn't mean you can go out into the world and say, it doesn't work for any of you either. And so I just think if you were at a dinner party and Stella Adler was there and Ivana Chubbuck was there and Roy London was there and Larry Moss was there and Elizabeth Kemp was there, God bless her, and they said, we will give you an hour of our time at this dinner party to tell you everything we know and think is important about acting. Are you going to say, I'm not talking to that half of the room because you all work from the real life? And I'm not talking to that half of the room because you work from imagination. It's like, why would you do that to yourself when you have this incredible smorgasbord of approaches that could benefit your work and other people? So I take a very open approach, and I think there's so much to be learned through unity and curiosity and listening, rather than damning and being divisive.
So there are a number of different strings to your bow. Has that been because of dry spells in acting, or what's the through line for you?
The through line is going to my grave knowing I really did the bucket list and lived out all these different things that are calling. So it's not so much the dry spell, it's because I love singing and I love music and I love songwriting and I love teaching and I love acting and doing accents. I love travel and food, and so it's wanting to not leave anything unexpressed or unfulfilled. So that's what causes me, like for example, I was just offered, I was quite some time ago offered Harp in the South, which is about to open at Sydney Theatre Company. And it was a wrenching decision because it's beautiful Kip Williams who's directing, who I adore. But I really, really had to listen to a part of myself that has wanted to do music. And music's always been the poor cousin to my acting. Like I've neglected it because I've been so busy with acting and teaching and coaching. So I just made a decision this year. I said, I'm 53 and I have to do this musical thing. And it was so hard because it's Kate Mulvaney and It's a beautiful piece. I did the workshop. It's going to be amazing. So that was a decision I made because I don't want to go to the grave not having listened to that musical part of myself.
Okay, so what's happening with the music then?
Well, I've got I have a single that's in a movie at the moment, a movie I was acting in with beautiful 15 of my students are in that movie, which I'm so proud of. It's called Thicker Than Water, and the single is called Emancipate, and it's this raunchy sort of slightly X-rated song. It's a fantasy, you know, I thought, oh, what's a dark side of myself that I can put into a song? And, you know, we've done the work with beautiful Elizabeth Kemp, who's all about the shadow, and I was like, oh, let's do this like raunchy S&M sort of dominatrix guy, which is so not me in real life, but I just thought I'd create this character. So Emancipate is a dance single with a pumping bass line that I recorded, and I put that's been accepted into a movie, so that's out there. And the next single is coming. X-Ray is my next single. That's going to be recorded this year, and I'm currently doing a course at the Conservatorium of Music in singing.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah, what a joy that must be.
Oh, I just go to that class, and it's the first time I went 4 weeks ago. It was like food. I was like starving. My musical self was like, oh, and then I just had this huge smile on my face after, you know, during and after that class, and it stayed with me.
You're very busy. You do lots of different things. Is it difficult to have a private life alongside all of these things? Often people talk about acting as being all-consuming.
Yeah.
And I've talked to actors who find it quite difficult to balance a private life. What's been your experience?
Well, that's a great question. I really feel for my partner, Matt, because he's so patient with me because, I mean, last year I did 2 plays at Sydney Theatre Company, and they were both in Sydney, and I live in Sydney with my partner, Matt. But I hardly saw him. Like for about 6 months of last year, we were like ships in the night because I'd come home from the show and he'd be in bed, and then when I'd sleep in to get some rest, and he'd already be at work. So even though we're in the same city and in the same apartment, we hardly saw each other. So I think it's hard on the partner. I mean, I don't envy being the partner of an actor because it does require immersion. And I remember going to audition for House of Cards, and it was a really important audition, but I'd planned a dinner with Matt, and we'd planned this for quite some time. And then the audition came up last minute on the night of the dinner. I really needed to stay home and not go to that dinner because it was a lot of dialogue to learn and a lot to get my head around. But I felt bad because I thought, I'm always saying no, like I'm always like prioritizing the auditions over things to do with Matt. You know, he's had to put up with that. So I decided to go to the dinner anyway. And when I got home, work on the script. I didn't do a great audition because I wasn't prepared enough. And you see, that's the difficult thing. You don't want to hurt your partner or make them feel rejected, but if you don't immerse, you could really not even have a look in, a real chance at that role. So it's difficult. So yeah, it does have an impact on the personal life, but I'm trying to balance that by, like now, as opposed to when I was single, I would just, if there was a role in Africa, I'm gone. But now I'm like, well, how's it going to impact Matt, and is it worth doing it for the amount of time away from him, and you know, and all of that. So yeah, I think it has an enormous impact on the personal life. But I still have a personal life, and a rich one at that. But yeah, it's a little more challenging. I suppose it's like that with people with kids too, and having to juggle all of that.
Yes, absolutely.
You know.
Yeah. Well, Anthony, I think that's perhaps a good place for us to end.
Oh, it's been a delight.
It's been just gorgeous.
Thank you, lovely woman.
Oh,
thank you so much.
You
Great
so
questions.
Much. Oh,
Great
good.
questions.
Thank you. So I've been here with Anthony Brandon Wong, and so thank you, Anthony, for coming along.
It's been a joy. Thank you.
Pleasure.